how you can prevent it, and also a bit about preventing illness and what we can do to stop us getting ill or make it a bit less likely. So I'm going to share my screen with you all now. So here we go. So can you all see that? Perfect. So illness and overtraining. We'll start off by talking a bit about preventing illness. So why do we get ill? We get ill when our immune system gets weak. So we can't then protect ourselves from infections and viruses. Our immune system gets weak when we train a lot. So the higher stress and the higher training load you put on your body, the weaker your immune system is, and the more likely you are to get ill. You can also get ill because you're in contact with a lot of other ill people. So, for example, if your friends and family are ill, you might get something from them. So in those sorts of situations, it'd be either best to stay away from the ill people or ask them, for example, if they're coughing, just make sure if they're not coughing into their elbow or into their hand, just say, can you sort of not cough on me, if that makes sense. But yeah, the main thing we talk about when we think about illness is hygiene. And a lot of these things that I've got on the screen here are quite simple, like washing your hands before you eat. I hope you all do that normally. But obviously that just prevents any bacteria getting into your body through eating. Lids on bottles is a really interesting one. Junior race team, I don't know whether you've heard of it, it's called HMT. It used to be one of the biggest British race teams probably about 5 or 6 years ago for juniors, and they were really hot on a lot of this stuff. So a couple of bits of this are from them. But lids on bottles, so if you can, when you're out training, put a lid on your bottle. If not, when you take a drink from a bottle out on a training ride, don't necessarily drink the first sip, spit it out, because when you go out, obviously on the roads, especially if it's dirty or in winter, all the spray from the road goes on your bottle. So then on the nib of the bottle, you've got all that mud. So if you just keep drinking that, all you're doing is drinking all the mud and all the dirt and all the bacteria from the road. So that's something that can increase the likelihood of you getting ill. So if you don't have a lid on your bottle that you can take off, then if you just spit that first mouthful out, at least that should hopefully have got rid of most of the dirt that's come out of the bottle, if that makes sense. Also, make sure when you go to the toilet, you shut the lid when you flush, because if you don't, all that bacteria that's in the toilet will then come out and be spread around the bathroom where you are. Obviously, it's a bit easier to control when you're at home because you could get everyone, for example, in the house to do it. But yeah, it's just good practice and helps prevent as much bacteria as you can getting near you, basically. Also, refreshing water. So if you've had a bottle on your bike and you've not drunk it, or you've drunk half of it and you think, oh, it's all right, it'll be okay for tomorrow's session, don't do it. The bottles that you use, the plastic, they're actually designed to be single use or used for like a short period of time. So if you leave liquid in there for a long period of time, the plastic from the bottle can actually seep into the water. So if it's like a couple of days old, you might notice it tastes a bit different. That's why. It's because of the plastic from the bottle. So if you make sure that you refill it every time, then at least you know the water that you are drinking is fresh. And that's the same thing goes for cleaning your bottles regularly, just to prevent any buildups of bacteria. Then we're moving on to nutrition. So we spoke a bit about nutrition a few weeks ago, and our guest speaker that was supposed to be coming on, it will be coming on hopefully within the next few weeks. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it this week because he's at the Paris-Nice. What a shame. But at least he's helping some big riders out with that. Ooh. So he did have a valid reason not to be here. But we'll just talk a bit more about nutrition. So what he would have told you is about eating the right amount on a ride. So I've just given you a bit of a guideline here. So 60 grams of carbs an hour is what you tend to look for. It can differ depending on rates of carbohydrate utilization, depending on the person. So some people might not be able to process high amounts of carbs, whereas some people might be able to have 100 grams of carbs an hour and be absolutely fine. Other people might really struggle. So it's all about learning your own amount of carbs that you can take, basically, and building up to that. But making sure you've got enough carbohydrate to cope with the demand. So you are fueling and using that fuel rather than using other sources like fat, which can be good in moderation. But if you're using your fat reserves all the time, you're not going to have any fat reserves. And that can be bad for your health and can make you ill. Making sure you've got a balanced diet as well. We spoke a bit about this the other week, but that's something that will help build your immune system and make you less likely to pick up an illness. Vitamin C is a big one because that is basically designed to help prevent illness. But any vegetables and fruits, making sure you get that 5 a day is really important, because the vitamins that you get from that will help you stay healthy and also prevent you from getting ill, or help reduce the risk of you getting ill. Same with hydration. It just helps those vitamins get absorbed into your body, so that, again, it helps to prevent that illness. Then we're talking a bit more about training. So how can you prevent getting ill through training? This is a really strange one at the bottom, mud guards. But again, it's a similar sort of principle to the bottles and not drinking the first sip out of your bottles. If you've got a mud guard on, you're going to get less spray in your face. So that's where that one sort of comes from. Ensuring you've got enough recovery. We'll talk a bit about this when we go into the overtraining part of this call. But ensuring that you've rested and had enough recovery means that your body, your immune system has time to recover. So you're not just completely hammering your immune system and making it get lower and lower and worse until you physically can't defend yourself. Making sure you wear the right clothes for the weather is really important. If you get cold, you're more likely to get ill. So making sure in the winter you're wrapped up warm and not just going straight to shorts and jersey when you see the sun's out. Like, if the temperature's okay as well, that's fine. But just because it's sunny doesn't necessarily mean it's warm enough to be in shorts and jersey. There's general rules about 16 degrees is when you can take your leg warmers and arm warmers off. But obviously some people run a bit hotter or colder, but that's the general rule that most people use. And again, sleep. We talk about sleep all the time within cycling and how important it is. But that, again, is time where you can recover and your immune system can build again and get over the hard training that you've put it through. So to prevent illness when traveling, this is slightly different. So, for example, if you're going on a training camp, travel days take a lot out of you. And also, if you're traveling through an airport or through a train station, you're coming into contact with a lot of people, or a lot of things that have come into a lot of contact with a lot of people. So there's some things that you can do to prevent this illness when you're traveling. So the day before you travel, try not to do anything hard or long in duration. So, for example, if you're out in Spain, don't do a really big day before you come home thinking, oh, it's the last chance I've got to get these miles in over here. Because if you go and do a really big day and come home absolutely knackered, your immune system's down and it's more likely to pick up an infection on your way back. Again, use hand sanitizer and wash your hands frequently. Everything that you touch in an airport or a train station has been touched by a lot of people. So making sure that you keep your hands clean, because your hands are ultimately going to be touching your food, is really important. And then again, eating well. As I said earlier, it's a long day when you're traveling. So making sure you eat and remember to eat will help your immune system stay boosted all day for that. So this is a little thing that you can do. It's not, you don't have to do it, but it's something that I found when racing. It's been really good. So these zinc defense lozenges are basically a way of helping reduce symptoms and helping you recover and your body get over colds and flus. So it's recommended if you were traveling, for example, taking a flight, to take these leading up to it just to help prevent getting ill. Basically, it coats your throat and prevents or helps to prevent the bacteria actually getting in to your bloodstream and into your system. It obviously can't completely prevent it happening, but it dramatically reduces the likelihood. And you take these every 2 to 3 hours. So while you're traveling, for example, if you start to feel a bit of a cold or a flu coming on, you can also take them. They're just like little peppermint tablets, basically, and you dissolve them in your mouth, and they can just help you get over illness a bit more quickly. Or if you can feel like, for example, the cold or flu coming on, it will make it a lot milder. So it might not affect your training, or it might not affect you as badly as it would have done if you weren't taking them. But again, it works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's just something to bear in mind when you're thinking about illness. So that's the first part about illness done. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and welcome any questions from anybody. So does anybody have any questions about illness and how we can sort of start to prevent it, or why we get ill, or anything to do with that? I can see Hughes type in. Has anybody else got any questions? Oh, I see some more people typing in the chat. That's really good to see. So illness, it can be anything to do with illness. Would you still train if you have a low-level cold for weeks on end? I think it depends. It depends on how much it's affecting you. If it's just a little sniffle and it's not affecting your breathing, it's not affecting your resting heart rate, which is a really important thing to look at. If it's just a baseline level cold, yes, you can carry on training as normal. If it's affecting you, for example, if it's not affecting you doing your base training, so your long rides, but it's affecting you at high intensity, maybe cut back the high intensity until it's gone. But it all just depends on how that cold is affecting you. I've got another one from Ollie. Should I train when I have a cold or an illness? Depends on how bad the illness is. If you're really, really ill, then I wouldn't bother. If it's a slight cold, you can go out and you can do bits of training, but you just tone it back. So if you're really not feeling well, don't go and do a really hard turbo session where you're going to struggle to breathe if you're already struggling. But again, it depends on the illness, because if your illness is affecting your throat and your breathing, you're not going to be able to do that training. So it all depends on what the illness is and how you then go about it. If it's in your chest, definitely take it easy, because you can't breathe properly and your body can't function properly. But if it's just a low level sort of cough or cold, you can kind of get away with riding a bit more. Harrison, does staying hydrated help stop illness and recover from illness quicker? So staying hydrated just helps basically absorb vitamins, and the vitamins are the bits that help you heal quicker. So staying hydrated just accelerates stuff, because it can it basically provides a medium for any reactions to happen in your body. So everything will happen quicker if you're hydrated. If you don't have the water, then you won't be able to your body won't be able to basically perform the chemical reactions that it needs to recover. So that's sort of why hydration is important. So I think that's all the questions for now. So I'm going to go back onto the PowerPoint and we can start talking a bit about overtraining, and then I'll give you another chance to ask questions at the end. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Bear with me. There we go. So we're on to the overtraining part of the talk now. So what is overtraining? So there's a lot of words on your screen now. I'm just going to read it out to you. And this is the dictionary definition of what overtraining is. So it's when a person exceeds their body's ability to recover from strenuous exercise. So overtraining can be described as a point where a person may have a decrease in performance and plateauing as a result of failure to consistently perform at a certain level or training load, a load which exceeds their recovery capacity. So again, there's a lot of words there, but I'm just going to pick out a couple which have already been highlighted. So recovery. Recovery is mentioned a lot in here because that's basically what it is. Overtraining is when you're training really, really hard, but you're not giving your body enough time to recover. So basically all you're doing is digging yourself into a deeper and deeper hole. And that then leads to you not being able to complete the sessions. So rather than not being able to complete the sessions and then stopping and recovering and trying them again, you end up continually failing to complete the sessions because you're like, oh, I'm not doing it. I need to try harder. But it's actually not, you're not trying hard enough. It's you're not letting your body recover enough, if that makes sense. So here's a couple of the signs that might indicate you're overtraining. Then there's no like definition for what overtraining is, as in there's no strict, if you've got these, you're overtraining. There are other causes that might be like an indicator of overtraining. It might not just be overtraining that's causing these things. So for example, recent increasing of training load might indicate that it's due to overtraining if you've only just started feeling this way recently. But you tend to notice that if you're overtraining, you're really, really tired all the time, on the bike, off the bike, just really, really fatigued. And then when you go to bed, you find it hard to sleep because you're just your body is that like low on energy. You just can't function properly. Also, you can see mood changes, so you can become a bit depressed, or you could become angry, and just changes like that, because of the situation you're in, and also just because your body is that tired that you're struggling with it. You see it a lot with, for example, bodybuilders. When they prep for things, they decrease their food, and that's a similar sort of thing. So they can get really moody, basically, because they're not eating enough, and their body's like, I need more food. It's the same sort of thing. So you're training too hard, so your body's not got that energy anymore. So you'll then end up being in a bad mood. If your performance deteriorates for a long period of time, so it's understandable if you're in the last week of a really hard training block, your performance might decrease because you're tired and you're doing it on tired legs, and that's perfectly normal. But if you're doing it week in, week out, and you're struggling every time, there's something wrong. Increased or decreased heart rate. So your resting heart rate is something that I would recommend that everybody sort of checks and keeps in check with, because that is your main indicator of whether you're ill. So your resting heart rate will change depending on, so it'll increase if you're overtraining. It could also be, so your heart rate could also be suppressed. So for example, if you're doing a session, especially if you work to heart rate zones, and you no matter how hard you try, you can't get that heart rate up, that's an indicator that you're overtraining, because you physically can't go that hard because your body is telling you, no, I can't do it. Unexpected changes in weight, that can happen because you're eating more, or because you're eating the same but training too much, so you're losing weight. So it just depends on the side of that. And also if you're ill a lot, because as we mentioned earlier, training a lot can weaken your immune system because of the high intensity and the amount of strain you're putting your body through. So how do we reduce the risk of overtraining? So managing the intensity. So don't go and do high intensity sessions all day, every day, and expect to not overtrain, because you will struggle and you will end up overtraining if you're doing the same intensity all the time. So vary your intensity and make sure you're resting. So at least once a week, you want a rest day or a recovery ride or something at least. Some people can cope with more training loads, some people can't. So it just depends on personal situation. And also life stresses, something that really does end up getting overlooked, especially as a rider yourself. You don't think about everything else that's going on. You just think, right, bike riding is completely separate. But for example, if you've got exams, if you're moving house, if you've got all things like that going on, if there's other things going on at home, it can really, really stress you out. And that stress puts stress on your body as well as your mind. It really does stress your body, and you can actually get physical fatigue from that stress. So it's really important to account for stuff like that, and maybe even dial the training back if you're going through a stressful period like exams, because it can just be like a double-ended sword. You're trying to do well at one thing and you're trying to do well at the other, and you can't do both. So trying to do a really hard training block while you're doing your exams just isn't going to work, because you're trying to do too much and your body's just not built for that stress. And that can also lead to things like overtraining. So you need to kind of manage your workload dependent on what you're doing. Eating correctly for the training you're doing. We'll come on to this in a bit, but eating correctly will help you manage the training load, so that you're able to meet the demands, and it will prevent a session like a normal training block becoming an overtraining block because you're not eating. Again, as I spoke about earlier, monitoring your resting heart rate is a really good way to reduce the risk, because if you know what your resting heart rate is, you can tell when you're either going to get ill or when something's not right, because your resting heart rate will change. Testing. So the reason I've put testing on here is the testing itself doesn't reduce the risk of overtraining by doing a test, but making sure your zones are right. Because if you, for example, if you've done an FTP test last year and you've got a high FTP, and then you have a big break and you still work to that same FTP that you were doing before the off-season break, without retesting, you could actually be training over your body's capacity and over the zones that you're supposed to be training in. And this can lead to overtraining because you're not training in the zones that you think you are. So making sure you've tested relatively recently or within the same training block that you're in will allow you to make sure your zones are right. So therefore, you're not going to be at risk of overtraining because you're training to the right zones. And again, we said about resting. So making sure you've got 1 or 2 rest days built into a week, and that you change your training dependent on how you're feeling. There will inevitably be sessions that you're doing fatigued and you'll go into tired and you'll come out of even more tired. But it's finding that balance and not feeling like every session you're going into, you're feeling fatigued. If you're feeling fatigued into every single session, you need to sort of say something to your coach or reassess what you're doing and think, right, okay, I need a break. Have a couple of days just doing an easy rides, and then you can get back on it. Because that's a lot easier having a couple of days rest then and being able to carry on training than getting to the point of overtraining, because it's really hard to then get back to a place where you can then start training again. So what do you do if you overtrain? So you've got to take time off. And if you, depending on how long you've been overtraining for, this can be quite a long period of time. It can be up to like a month or even longer, depending on how long you've overtrained for, because if you keep overtraining, there's other things that can come from it. So chronic fatigue is one, where because you've been overreaching and overtraining for that long, your body just can't cope, and your body needs to take that time off to recover. So if you've overtrained, you need to take time off, and you can't just rush back into it, because if you don't allow yourself enough time to recover, all that will end up happening is you'll start training again, but your body won't be ready for it. So then you have to take time off again. So rather than doing a 4-week block, you'll do a 3-week block off, and then you'll start training and do 2 weeks training and then have to have another 3 weeks off. So it's really important that if you do end up overtraining, that you come back in the time that it takes your body and don't try and rush back to it. So RED-S is relative energy deficiency in sport. So this is very similar to overtraining, but it's not the training's fault, if that makes sense. So overtraining is when your training is too hard, basically, and you're pushing yourself too hard all the time. But RED-S is nutrient deficiency. So that's not eating enough when you're riding. So it'll have similar symptoms, and you'll notice it in the same way as you would overtraining. But it's when the energy you expend, so the energy you use for your training sessions, is higher than the energy you're intaking through your food. So this is all under fueling. So this is why nutrition is really important. You commonly see this if you've ever seen any articles on it, or if you've done any sports stuff at school, you might have heard of it. It's really, really common in females in competitive sports because obviously figures are a big thing for women, and their diet doesn't always meet the needs, but it's easier to diagnose as well in women being this rather than overtraining, because for a woman, if they have this, they tend to stop their periods. So if there are any women on the call, if you notice those symptoms, then you really do need to either go and see a doctor to check it is this, and start eating more when you're riding. But they're two things that are very similar, RED-S and overtraining, but slightly different causes. So that's everything for tonight. So thank you for joining, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome any more questions. So if anyone has any questions about the second half of this PowerPoint, so that was about overtraining, please can you let me know in the chat. How easy does a recovery ride need to be classed as a recovery ride? So if you work to zones, it'll have to be zone 1. But basically, it's just turning the pedals. So it can depend on a variety of things, but basically just making sure that you're just riding your bike. If you feel like you're pushing on, it's too hard. You literally just want to feel like you're turning the pedals. So that's how easy it has to be classed as a recovery ride. Again, if you work to zones, it's a bit easier to distinguish between the two because you just stay in that zone 1. But it shouldn't feel like you're putting out any effort. I see a message from Christian. How should you balance training and revision for tests? So that's a really good question. So personally, I would make sure it depends on the person. If you find that training will stress you out if you're doing revision, then I'd knock the training back. But also it can be a really good tool to go, okay, right, I'll do this amount of revision. I'll do my training to break it up, and then I'll do some more revision. So it depends on the person. But if you find it like relaxing, it's quite good to do as like a break from revision. But don't let it kind of go the other way and take over from your revision. You need to find a split a balance. So you're still riding your bike, but maybe not for as long or not as the intensity. So you're just enjoying riding your bike and you're not thinking about it. So that takes the mental stress out of the bike riding part. So that will help you balance it a bit. So that's probably what I'd suggest. But also take the pressure out of it. So if you've got training and revision comes first for the 2-3 week period that you're revising for the exams up close to it. And training takes priority a bit further out. So you still do your revision earlier on, but when you get close to the exams, then you kind of peter out the training a bit and spend a bit more time on that revision. And we've got one from Ollie. If I've done a long, hard effort, then rest for 5 to 10 minutes, my heart rate still hasn't dropped, what does that mean? So it can mean a load of different things, and it depends also what you're training. So, for example, if you've done a really long effort and you've given yourself that much time to recover and it hasn't dropped substantially, then you might need a bit longer recovery. But it could also just be, it depends on what you mean by it hasn't dropped. If it hasn't dropped, as in to really, really low, it could just be because you're a bit tired. But if it's not dropped at all and it's stayed at the same pace, then you need to have a longer recovery until it's dropped at least a little bit. But also it depends on what you're training for. If you're training recovery, for example, you're doing intervals where you're trying to train that recovery period, you won't drop down as far as you'd expect with your heart rate. But yeah, if it's not dropping down at all, then you probably want to rest a little bit longer. Have we got any more questions at all? I don't think so. I think that's it. So thank you guys for joining me. So the key points for today are with illness, making sure you've got good hygiene and nutrition. Overtraining, make sure you rest. Rest and recovery are really, really important. And making sure that you're thinking about what you're doing when you're training. So you're making sure that you're getting those rests and making sure you're monitoring your heart rate and things like that, so you can tell when you're going to get ill. So thank you guys for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week.